Hello, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here. Joining me on the show, we've done some home and homes here with Los Angeles Football Network, Ryan Dyrud, one of my favorite people to follow. And guess what, Ryan? We got USC all over the place. So you cover the Rams, Chargers, USC, UCLA, and we have the top two picks coming from USC. So we're going to break down Jordan Addison, Mekhi Blackmon. How you doing, man?
Hey, man, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on. You're a great follow as well. Obviously, have you on our show and you do great. And I could be wrong here because I'm just, following through Twitter. But so if I'm incorrect, I apologize. But congrats on the book release. Did I see that right?
You are right. Yes,
Well,
thank you.
congratulations.
Yep.
Huge accomplishment. Huge accomplishment.
I appreciate that. For everybody who hasn't heard yet, football is a numbers game. Went kind of behind the scenes with Pro Football Focus for about a year and a half, reporting on where they came from, the grades everybody likes to debate, but so much more than that. What they do for NFL teams, how the business got started, what Chris Collinsworth does, and a lot more drama than I thought was actually going to happen. So there's your tease, and you can go to Amazon. You brought it up, not me. I'm just saying, but you can go to Amazon, search "Football is a Numbers Game," and you can get it there. So thank you so much for that. How was it? It's funny because we were talking just before, and the Los Angeles Rams, I was like, well, they're always, bleep them picks. And I didn't see you guys on the first night of the draft. So they must have had no draft picks, right? And then you corrected me. There were 14 draft picks for the Rams. You guys must have been crazy busy.
Yeah, very busy. They had the 14. Chargers had their standard 7. They always are just chalk 1 through 7. But yeah, Matt, it's always a funny misconception because I was on Radio Row out in Phoenix, and we're at the media party talking with everyone, and everyone automatically is like, "Oh, Rams, no picks, no picks," and I'm like, just because they don't have a first round pick doesn't mean they have no picks. They started with 11, ended up trading back, I think, 5 different times to end up with 14. The bulk of those obviously in 6th and 7th rounds. So I know a lot of fans don't get excited about those, but that's kind of how the Rams have built their roster. And they added 26 undrafted free agents. So a total of 38 new players added on draft weekend, almost doubling what was on the roster. They had 45 going into the draft, added 38. So they're getting close to that 90 finally. But yeah, busy weekend, a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is a lot of bios for you to read and to start to understand who these
Yeah.
players are. Although my rule is with UDFAs, you got to make me learn your name in
Mhm.
training camp. If you do, then we got something there. But if not, I'm not going to bother. But I mean, well, just while we're on the subject, though, can we just talk about the Rams for a second? Because it is a little bit of a misconception of the bleep them picks, just because it was a tweet turned into a T-shirt. They really did build the Super Bowl team a lot through the draft and
Mhm.
finding players. I mean, Aaron Donald was a first round draft pick and is one of the most important players there. But it is interesting that they become sort of this beacon for teams pushing the chips to the middle of the table. And the Vikings did do this last year. They brought back Patrick Peterson, za'darius
Mhm.
Smith. They trade for TJ Hawkinson in the deadline. And I think it's interesting because the Rams are the team that everyone's going to look at and say, hey, that year with the Rams, they went and got Odell Beckham, Von Miller. But as then Buffalo tried to get Von Miller, that didn't really work out. It's kind of an outlier situation that really worked for that team, and they won the Super Bowl and they never have to give it back. But at the same time, it's not like something you would tell everybody else to do.
Yeah, they definitely went about building the house with a very different blueprint. And if you look at contractors and they have like, this is how we build blueprints, this is how we do Trek homes. They were the dreamer that did something very different and made the first Lincoln log home or something. And we'll see if it ever catches on. Like you said, some teams have kind of taken it. With the Vikings, you guys, I feel like could either be called the Los Angeles Vikings or the Minnesota Trojans, whatever you want, because you got kind of blends there, obviously with Kevin O'Connell. But yeah, I mean, it's a model that worked for them. They still kind of are abiding by that. Now, a lot of people, not to go too deep, because obviously we'll focus more on your team, the Vikings, but a lot of people will see this offseason as, well, now the Pied Pipers come to take its due, and they had to release everybody and cut all this cap, and they have like 76 million. I think they have more in dead money than they're actually paying roster players. And it certainly looks like that. Now, this season could be an absolute disaster. They win 3 games and then it'll prove everyone right. I'm of the belief that they're more in a remodel year instead of a rebuild year, like so many people like to say, if we're going back to the home analogy there. And so they kept their 3 core with Stafford, Aaron Donald, and Cooper Kupp. And if you look at around the league, like if you have 3 core players, that's kind of what you want to start with. And they've decided to really go with a lot of youth, and they've brought in coaches that can mentor. When you look at the defensive staff, Raheem Morris, great teacher, great coach. Obviously, he's been there now for 3 years. They added Jimmy Lake, formerly of Washington. I know not a great 10 years as a head coach at Washington, but a phenomenal secondary coach. They've added him as an assistant head coach on defense, but to also coach up their very, very young secondary that is without Jalen Ramsey now. And so you look at just kind of the way the staff has been formed this offseason and then what they've done in free agency. And then obviously adding these 38 rookies, they're kind of taking the approach of, we're going to teach and mentor and get back to what made us love football, which Sean McVay has said many times. He was kind of burnt out after last year. And B, we believe that the NFC, outside of the Eagles, outside of probably the Vikings, and outside of the Niners, who have quarterback question marks, like, we can still make some noise because we got the best defensive player in football. We have the only quarterback in the entire NFC with a ring in Matthew Stafford, and we still have our head coach. So we'll see. It could blow up in their faces, but if it does, then maybe they'll just get Caleb Williams in 2024. So
I'm not sure I would say outside of the Vikings, to tell you the truth. They're going to have to prove that to me because, this year is one of those. They won 13 games, and it's a very weird 13 games to talk about because when you win 13 games but have a negative point differential and lose in the first round, it's hard to be like, yeah, they'll just run it back and do that again. But wait a minute, is that a good thing to run back and do again? And for a lot of intents and purposes, they are running it back with the same quarterback. Thielen is gone. Kendricks is gone, but Harrison Smith is still here. There's moving parts with Brian Flores, but it's like, if you're ranking the teams in the NFC for who's the most dangerous, who you're the most scared of, I think that the Vikings probably end up like 5th or 6th, which is kind of where they always go into every season, ranking that way. And I do think that Los Angeles and the Rams, because this is a team that I think the Vikings and Rams could be battling for playoff spots this year if Matthew Stafford remains healthy. But it's also so interesting to talk about the all-in thing and what's happened since, and how, and I'm sure you guys talk about this from time to time, like, if the guy catches the interception, right? I mean, San Francisco, it's just so much different of a conversation about the Rams. It's, they went all in, they failed, it didn't work, because that's what's really been the conversation here for years with Kirk Cousins coming off the NFC Championship appearance. Was they pushed the chips in the middle of the table with Kirk. Every offseason was fill needs. They panicked and they, came up short so many times. And I just think about how like razor thin it is between being a team that everyone talks about, hey, those Rams, we should do what they did. And can you believe how dumb those Rams were? It's really remarkable to think about like how small that line is.
Oh, it's extremely razor thin, a tightrope, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, it could be a very different conversation. I'm always the glass half full approach. And I look at it as, you look at a lot of things in sports and that same conversation, right? If Ryan Tannehill doesn't throw 3 interceptions in that playoff and Cincinnati's kicker goes 4 for 4, then we're not talking about Joe Burrow as the great young QB that he is going on that run. If, the Tuck rule and Tom Brady, maybe that dynasty never starts if Charles Woodson ends up getting that fumble in that game. So, but the difference is, and what you're alluding to is, those were still teams constructed in a normal fashion, whereas the Rams did something so different that if they had that failure, it would be seen as a colossal failure because they didn't set themselves up for the future. They set themselves up essentially for that 1 or 2 year window. So to your point, absolutely things had to go their way in sports. As you know, as I'm sure is in your book a little bit, there's analytics, but also there's got to be some luck involved in order for you to win the big one. And the Rams certainly had that. And, that Tart dropped interception was one. But what I always say is Jalen Ramsey also dropped an interception the possession before that in the red zone that could have put the Rams up. So you never know.
Oh, you could go back 100 times. And look, no one knows this better than Vikings fans, right? Of all the, like, what if this went that way? And we did an entire show, I think a summer ago, about whether we could prove that the Vikings are cursed. And the best argument was that the odds of all these things going wrong for them are almost impossible. There's no other team you can find who had two quarterbacks have their knees fall apart and like ruin where the franchise was at that time, or Gary Anderson made every kick, or, you know, all the things we could talk about. So certainly, but that's my thing is like, you don't have to give it back. I mean, they certainly earned it. And look, Matthew Stafford had to make one of the all-time great throws in NFL history and lead one of the all-time great drives to win it. So they earned it. It's just interesting to think about, like with the Vikings last season, you're trading for TJ Hawkinson with kind of this idea of like, look, the NFC is weak. We need to kind of push the chips to the middle of the table, take this shot, add this extra weapon. And then you get to now and you go, okay, well, if Hawkinson doesn't sign an extension and you just did that for a half a season, like, was that the good thing to do? So I'm always thinking about that. And the Rams are sort of at the top of that list. But let's talk about Jordan Addison, because everybody has figured out by now on the show how much I liked the pick and had been sort of on Jordan Addison as a potential player for them. It's really the first time this has happened for me, so I have to keep bringing it up, where I picked the guy in mock drafts and draft simulations who they actually picked. But no, I mean, I watch a lot. I'm a Pac-12 After Dark guy, so I stay up late, watch those games. He impressed me so many times, but you would have watched him closer than me and know him better than me. So what are the Vikings getting in Jordan Addison?
Yeah, you know, I obviously cover all 4 LA teams, but I cover USC probably the most up close and personal at practices and at games, and was at the Pac-12 title game, and which he didn't play in. But Addison, I mean, this is a home run pick. First of all, I don't know if there's a better fit in the NFL. He could have fit anywhere, but the best fit for me was Minnesota. Just being able to line up alongside Justin Jefferson. The style, I know there's different opinions on Kirk Cousins, but the style of quarterback he is, I feel like just fits really well with Addison does well, which is, you know, he's a route running tactician. He's faster than he looks. I know he ran a 4.49 at the combine, but I mean, just put on the Stanford tape. He was blowing by guys, had a 75-yard touchdown where he broke free over the top, and then also broke a tackle after the catch. So definitely has elusive speed. He's bigger than people give him credit for. I think he's listed at like 6'1", 6 foot, 175 or something, but I think he'll play in around 185, 190. So he has good enough size, but you know, he's just a competitor. I mean, when he came to USC, we talked to him at USC Media Day, and you could tell he was definitely happy to be at USC. And I don't want this to get misconstrued or misquoted at all. He was happy to be at USC, but his singular goal was the NFL. Like that was, and USC gave him the best opportunity to get to where he wanted the NFL, even though he just won the Blitnikoff the year prior at Pitt with, you know, Kenny Pickett there. But he knew his projection at USC would push him even higher. Obviously, being with Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams certainly helps that. But yeah, you just could feel it from him. And you guys will see in the interviews, he's very kind of short and to the point and dry, but he's just professional. You ask him a question, he's not going to sugarcoat things. He's not going to give you a nice, like very kind-hearted 2-minute answer, but he's just going to tell you straight up, hey, what happened to this play? Oh, we ran the wrong route. Some people see it as rude, if you will. I saw it as, this is the guy he's just there for business. He's just a businessman. He's there to play football, there to compete. And he did it on the field. He was a great teammate, great in practice. So, I mean, the Vikings, to me, this was an absolute home run pick for you guys, and couldn't be a better fit for him with that offense.
There have been a few players that I've covered along the way who like end answers before you think, and they catch you off guard. And like, that's
Right.
him. Irv Smith did this. So he'll start talking and you're like, okay. And then he'll just kind of like, now I'm done saying anything about that. And you're like, oh, okay, on to the next question. So
Yeah.
maybe he'll develop that in the NFL, like finishing his third or fourth sentence. But all rookies and all young players, I think, before they get totally comfortable talking to the media, they kind of don't know how to navigate that yet. Not a red flag in my world.
Yes.
But I did pick up on the same thing from you, that this seems like a guy from the time he left high school who just had NFL on his mind and who knew that he could do it and who has got a supreme confidence about him. But I didn't get arrogance from him. It just seemed like he's somebody that is kind of an all football guy that all of these coaches always are looking for, right? I mean, it's good to be well-rounded in life, but sometimes in football, you have to be all about football. And I really like that he talked about kind of obsessing over Stephon Diggs and how Diggs runs his routes and studying receivers and things like that. It takes a ton of dedication to be good at this, especially at route running. And this guy is like, in my mind, he was the best route runner of all of those first round picks who were kind of taken in the same area.
100%. And it's such a lost art, right? Route running. And we talk about it every year at draft time, but it's like, who really is a good route runner? I mean, I find myself, obviously I was not very good, but I played receiver in high school. The only thing that kept me on the field was my route running. I mean, I'm 5'7", 165 wet. So I wasn't bringing much athletically to the table, but I could run routes. And when you look at the NFL today, even some of the greatest receivers are not great route runners. And so if you're a good athletic receiver and you can run routes, when you look at the likes of Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, who just like these guys that just create space, whether it's on the sideline, the open field, in the backfield, whatever it may be, because they're out running, that just opens up another level of the playbook. And especially what made Jordan Addison, I think, so dynamic and what will make him so much fun to watch in this Vikings offense, because I can already picture what Coach O'Connell can do, is in the goal line situation. And everyone wants to talk about his speed, what he's like in space, if he can play slot or inside. But when you think about that first and goal from the 5 to 7 or even the 7-yard in, and he can put people in like a washing machine at the goal line and be wide open at the pylon, that's, I think, where people get excited. And the fact that you have two options with him and Jefferson and obviously Hawkinson at tight end. So that is where I think he'll really make his name felt as a rookie, is at that goal line. And then obviously as they open things up in the intermediate game and what he can do in yak. But yeah, the route running is what separates him from me too. So me and you are definitely in agreement there.
Well, and I think, I mean, with Adam Thielen being gone, that was really his role. Was everyone's giving attention to Justin Jefferson, and then Thielen would get open in the red zone, and ended up fantasy owners really enjoyed that for a while. And I think Addison could be the same thing. And I think it was 25 touchdowns in 2 years over the last 2 seasons. But give me the concern. There's got to be a concern here. I mean, I do think, so you mentioned that he could put on some weight, and I think that's true. But I did kind of like, my eyes popped open a little bit when I first saw him, like, oh, this guy is very skinny. Like, you've been around the NFL dudes. They are jacked. I mean, they have popcorn muscles most of the time. Even the wide receivers are pretty jacked. I think that either there has to be muscle that's put on, or it's going to have to be some craftiness from Kevin O'Connell, which I think is probably the answer here. But what's the downside? Like, why would Jordan Addison not be a top 10 receiver as opposed to the 23rd pick?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It's got to be the size. And I spoke I said before, I'm a glass half full. So I think he can put on weight. But obviously banged up last year at USC here and there, missed some games, missed the end of the season. The end of the season was more just prepping for the draft. I think it was more just to stay healthy for this process, since that's been his goal, but missed, obviously a good middle portion of the season. And so that, I think, would be the concern. What he needs to do is obviously take notes from a guy like Devonta Smith, with Philly, who has become a very nice young player. That was his big concern, right? He was still drafted very early, but it was the size. I mean, that dude is literally a stick out there. You wonder how he doesn't just lose his head after getting one hit over the middle. So I think schematically, they'll have to do things to be smart with him, but also just learning your body. And he did this fairly well at SC. I look back to the UCLA game, when to not take a hit, how to avoid hits over the middle, how to, go out of bounds at the right time. And in the NFL, obviously that's just compounded because of how much bigger and stronger and faster the rest of the defenders are. So to your point, if there is a concern, I mean, let's be real. If this guy was 6'3", 210, he would have been a top 10 pick. So I think the reason why he fell to 24, I think it was because it's, he's 5'11", 6 foot, 175. Because I don't have any concerns with his catching, with his speed, with his route running, with his personality, anything like that. It's definitely would be the size that hopefully they can get beyond. And, we've seen a lot of 5'11", 6 foot guys have a lot of success. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that every one of these wide receivers had that one thing that kind of held them back from being that. Like, they all had talent. Quentin Johnston, who I really liked, you really liked. But if you tell me that he didn't go up and moss people, you're absolutely right. And Smith Najigbo was mostly a slot receiver. Like, every guy kind of had his one wart that allowed them to drop. But I also think we've seen a lot of guys that have some shortcoming end up working out in the NFL. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. And if he is wide receiver 2 or 3 to start the season, is it going to be him or is it going to be KJ Osborne? How does he work into the whole mix? So there's a lot to follow along. Now, a guy that was, I want to say, as controversial as a late third round pick can be within the fan base. And I think some of this was people want something on draft night to get jacked up about and to maybe debate and things. But Mekhi Blackmon, I don't know if you thought he was going to be this high of a draft pick. I know that the mock drafters did not think he was going to be this high of a draft pick, but I'm intrigued because I look at his PFF kind of profile, man coverage, zone coverage, tackling, coverage grade, and I know he's 24, so this probably helped him. But across the board, he scored really high in different coverages, good as a tackler. I think they see him as a nickel corner. Like, give me your view on Mekhi Blackmon.
Yeah, so I mean, I was thrilled for Mekhi, great young kid. You know, he's transferred twice, started up in San Mateo, California. Then he went to Colorado, you know, got like an extra COVID year while there, redshirted 1 year, had some injuries, and then obviously transferred to USC last year. So I was absolutely thrilled for him in his journey. I was definitely surprised he went that early. And not because he's a bad player by any means, just because there's not a lot of great tape because of the injuries that followed him. And then B, USC's defense overall was just so terrible last year. Now, that being said, he was one of the few bright spots in the defense. You basically had Tuli Pelotu, you had him and Kalen Bullock were like your 3 bright spots of the whole defense. So he definitely was one of those top players. Definitely, in my opinion, a much better man corner. He's extremely aggressive in press man. And so if you want a guy that's going to lock a guy down at the line of scrimmage, and now we'll see how that translates to the NFL. Obviously, officials are more flag happy in the NFL. So we'll see if he gets holding calls early on or whatnot. But definitely is very physical, strong, and can run really with any of the best size of receivers out there. It can definitely play zone. Grinch's system, Alex Grinch, that is, for USC, runs a very complicated system. It's a real mix of man and zone. And I think that's why they struggled last year, is just they had so many new bodies and it was a brand new system. And it was like guys just thinking all the time instead of just playing. And so I think he can do both. But with man, right, there's less thinking. You're just like, this is my guy. I'm locking you down. I'm taking you for a ride. And he was very good at that. And he had, I think, 3 interceptions or so. He had like 12 passes defense. So statistically, I think he finished all Pac-12, third All-American. So, I mean, really, he's a good draft pick, in my opinion. He's just a little more raw for maybe what people want to see as a third round pick. But at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen raw guys that get developed well and do good things. And he is older, as you mentioned, too. I mean, having a longer collegiate career. So he has a lot of at least tread that he's in, a lot of different systems he had to work through. So I think he'll learn quickly and be able to get up to speed very quickly in this Brian Flores defense, who I think fits him very well. So if you look at Addison as a perfect fit on offense, the system, I think, fits Blackmon very well as well with what Flores wants to do there. So it should be fun. So to answer your question shortly, I think it was probably a little high. I'm thrilled for him as a young man and the guy he is and the character he is. But I think over time, Vikings fans will learn to like this guy just because of what he brings. Now, last thing I'll say, he does have the option to get burned because of how aggressive he plays. And so it depends how often they're going to play too high shell or whatever to kind of cover his back, or if he does more nickel like you alluded to. So that's the one thing to watch for. But just him as a physical corner, athletic and smart, I mean, they definitely got a good one in him.
Yeah, I definitely think also when we're talking about someone who's drafted at the very last pick of the third round, like we have to kind of manage what our expectations are. I mean, when you draft a player, everybody makes out their depth chart and they put in all the draft picks, like starting or direct backup or something. And, sometimes that takes a couple of years before it happens. And cornerback is a position that usually does not come along quickly. But I think that there's a projection there for him to be a nickel corner, which has become extremely important. And you would know this. I mean, with the Rams, like Nickel Roby-Coleman for years, that was kind of the comparison I made for someone he's not quite as short as Roby-Coleman, but still like undersized, but super aggressive, kind of a baller guy that wants to go out and get it. But even when he was in Buffalo, like at first he started off as a situational player, developed, and finally became a consistent role player who nobody was like wanting his autograph or something after practice. You want Aaron Donald's, but you need solid players. So I guess I look at the pick as it's not going to blow anybody's socks off, but it was the last pick of the third round. I guess the only other criticism would be that they traded down, but
Mhm.
they needed to do that to pick up some extra capital. But I kind of see him as like, if he becomes a nickel corner for you, that's a pretty big win.
Oh, 100%. And, we all do this. We all fall victim to this. That's why we do what we do, and that's why people watch what we say. But it's like there's this paralysis by overanalysis, but also this instant reaction society that, hey, as soon as the pick, we have to have our grades and have to say projected what this is going to be. Whereas 3 years from now, if Mekhi Blackmon is playing at a Bryce Callahan like level, who Bryce Callahan went undrafted and became one of the premier kind of slot nickel corners in the game for a number of years. 3 years from now, if he's doing that, like, who cares if he was a first round pick, a seventh round pick, an undrafted round pick? It's like, hey, this dude's on our team and it makes our GM look smart. So we have to do what we do. We have to analyze, right? But third round at the time might seem rich, but hey, if in 3 years this guy's starting, then that's a phenomenal pick. You don't care where he went as long as he's on the field producing.
Okay, two more quick things. Listeners to this show wanted Dorian Thompson Robinson. What did you kind of make of where he got drafted? And were you a Thompson Robinson truther?
I love DTR. It would have been fun if he went to Minnesota. He's, it's so odd saying this because he was literally started outside of a couple games missed by injury, but started almost every game 5 years at UCLA from a true freshman, played 5 years. So going into his freshman year, played literally no high school ball, was a backup at Bishop Gorman and then came in very raw into college where then kind of Chip Kelly molded him and built him up. Um, as a leader and as a competitor, you'll find no one better. We always compare him to the Russell Westbrook of football, just that raw passion and emotion. I'm not saying the skill exactly, but just like the demeanor that they play on the field. Like he is just so raw, passionate, his love for the game, his leadership. He's a gifted passer. Obviously, everyone knows how athletically gifted he is. I will he be a starter one day? I don't know. I don't know if he's quite. I don't want to say this like he's a very smart. I'm not saying he's not smart, but his decision making is the thing that kind of has kept him back. Even in this last year where he cut the interceptions down substantially, it was still like his progressions were not quite there yet to make you a true elite NFL level quarterback. And usually after 5 years, if you're still not going through your progressions quickly, that's not something that just like happens in the NFL. That's usually a tell. But he's gotten better every single year. So who's to say he can't? Now, to answer your question about his fit with Cleveland, like as a DTR fan, and as we're not going to get into it, but as everyone knows about Deshaun Watson's off the field stuff, nothing would make me happier if in 2 years they eat that contract and DTR is starting in Cleveland. So he certainly fits with Stefanski and fits behind Deshaun, though, in terms of just how they play and their play style.
Well, right. And, Stefanski is going to want to run bootlegs and things like that and play actions, which I think Deshaun Watson maybe struggled with last year adjusting. But for a quarterback that if he does struggle with reads, that's kind of one easy hack to make
Totally.
it easier for him. I was always in the camp on him of, look, I really enjoyed watching him play. Pac-12 after dark all day.
Mm-hmm.
Loved watching this guy play. Super fun, super passionate. But when you are 6'1", 200 pounds at the quarterback position and you aren't a freak in any other way, you're not a 4'3", you're not like Russell Wilson, freak arms and hands and muscles. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to stay healthy. It's pretty tough to make it. Like, he doesn't have a cannon. He's got a good arm, but not a cannon. Like, all those things to me said, like, this guy could be a nice career backup. I think the same of Jaren Hall that the Vikings picked. But
Yep.
if they had picked him, it would have been like, oh, okay, I'm fine with it. I wouldn't put any expectations on the guy, but I know that everybody from UCLA absolutely loved the kid. And I'm not surprised that you did as well. And I think also people would be interested in where Eric Kendricks fits in to the Los Angeles Chargers, because this was a Chargers defense that improved, I think, last year from the first year that Staley took over, but still needs help, right? So where does Kendricks kind of fit into that mix?
Yeah, well, funny you ask. Obviously, you came on my show to talk about Eric Kendricks when they first signed him, and I love the pickup. Obviously, UCLA alum, he's LA royalty out here, so it's great. I loved watching his career at Minnesota. I would hope Viking fans, regardless of him leaving, will see him as a Viking for life and whatnot because of obviously the career he had there. But I think it's a great get for the Chargers. The interesting thing, Matt, is they they had a guy in Drew Tranquil who kind of had a true breakout year last year at that middle linebacker, him and Kenneth Murray, who they took in the first round a few years back. But Drew Tranquil, outside of Derwin James, was like the heartbeat of the defense. I mean, emotionally, statistically, all those things. I mean, he was the guy. And they decided, now there's been a bunch of different speculation. Was he offered an extension? Was he not? And that's all hearsay. And there's conflicting reports and whatnot. But they decided essentially without re-signing him to go in the direction of Eric Kendricks. And what I think, and you kind of alluded to this when you broke it down, what Eric Kendricks does so well is he's going to bring a different dynamic that Drew Tranquil necessarily wasn't. And also a veteran presence and leadership that I think this defense really needs. Because the biggest thing about this Chargers defense, you alluded to it perfectly, is they improved year over year, but still weren't great, especially with the talent they had, especially with the mind that Brandon Staley is. And the thing we've talked about a lot on our show is at some point, when you look at X's and O's and schematically, when you look at the Chargers and you really break down the film, they were not a problem schematically. It was a problem more of the execution of it. Like it was a problem more of the onus of players taking it on themselves and taking responsibility of what their job was, what their role was. And what's funny is when Derwin James was out for a considerable amount of time with an injury, the defense actually played better. And it's almost like they were relying on the greatness of a guy like Derwin James to kind of carry them as opposed to just doing their job and doing their schematic fit. And so I think a guy like Eric Kendricks coming in, all the greatness he brings in physicality, the speed that he still has at his age. You mentioned that he's actually really good in pass rush, just wasn't maybe in the correct scheme schematically last year, which I think they'll use him a lot this year in Staley's scheme. But I think it's more of the leadership of why they're having, of keeping guys accountable, doing their job. Because schematically, if you look at the film, guys were in the right places. They were just missing tackles. I mean, you look at Nick Chubb ran all over them. It wasn't because he was having gaping wide open holes. He was breaking 4 tackles and guys weren't wrapping up. So when you have a guy like Kendricks that's been there, done that, he's going to hold guys accountable and he's going to make them do their job when the coach can coach right. But if he's not out there making the tackles, so I think that's really what he's going to bring on top of all the giftedness that he has, even at his age. And maybe he's lost a step here and there, but I think that the leadership is really why they wanted him here, which is why I love the addition. And it's going to be a great season, hopefully here in LA with him.
Well, and I also think when you're trying to take a step from a good team to a great team, these are the players that you need. I mean, you see almost every team that makes it kind of do things like this. And he does have something left in the tank. I believe that. I just think that their scheme last year was as horrendous of a fit for him as you could have found. And I thought it was really telling that when I asked him at the end of the year, like, what did you make of kind of the defensive scheme and how it fit with you and everything? He just said, the Giants scored more points than us and we lost, and I wish we didn't. Like he just, he did not want to talk about that, but I've covered him long enough. I knew kind of what he was trying to say. And I think that everybody, because they were winning games, didn't want to come out and say the quiet part out loud that the scheme was a horrible fit for some of their most important players, him and Harrison Smith. So I think it will fit a lot better. And I mean, that guy is, like you said, royalty in Los Angeles, but also one of the best leaders I've ever covered. That's exactly the type of person that you need for that team. I know I said that was the last question, but it popped into my mind that once upon a time, the Chargers went into a season where it was probably going to be the last for Phillip Rivers. And then they did not know what their quarterback future was going to be. That sort of describes the Vikings. Can you just take me back to the end of that before they draft Herbert, which obviously turns out to be a marvelous pick for him. And if they were in the NFC, they would be like the best team in the NFC just by having Justin Herbert. But I feel like it would have been a very similar uncertain feeling as the Vikings are dealing with right now. And we're talking about potentially drafting a quarterback next year, or do you extend? How long do you want it to go? It must have been difficult for that team to move on from somebody that they knew could still play, as he showed with the Colts, but it was just sort of time.
Yeah. It was so interesting because in 2018, right? I can't remember I think they won 12 games, but they went to the playoffs with Phillip. They beat the Ravens in the first round. They ended up getting blown out the second round by the Patriots, but it was like, okay, and that was their, one of their first, I think it was their second year in LA. So it was like, they were trying to make a name for themselves in LA. Phillip Rivers was obviously a San Diego guy, being there his whole career, but they make the playoffs right off the bat. The Rams were, not quite, well, they were good, but both teams were in the playoffs. And the very next year is when they, win, I think 5 wins or something like that. And so it was at that time that it started feeling like, okay, can they ever reach that pinnacle again with Phillip Rivers at their age? With his contract, with what the pieces they need, or do they need to go with this high of a draft pick, which who knows when that comes again, being 6th overall, after a pretty good quarterback class in general. At the time, Tua was seen as the number one, and then obviously Burrow went on his run, and then Herbert kind of started sneaking in the conversation of top 3 also. And so it's like, are we ever going to have this type of class again with this high draft capital without having to trade up, that we are set then for the next 15 to 20 years? So it was definitely interesting, but the writing was on the wall when the season went south. Philip knew of it. I mean, if you saw the end of the season presser without him saying he was done, like everyone knew it was his final game as a Charger. And so for the Vikings, what makes it interesting is like, if they make the playoffs this year, what do you do, right? I mean, if they win 4 games, I think it's like, okay, look at this quarterback class. You know what you got to do. But if they win 12, 11, 13 games again, they're going to be drafting at the back end of the round. Do you trade up? Are you consistent? So it's a tough spot to be in. The Chargers made it easier because they were just so bad that year and they had the 6th overall pick. So they kind of made the decision for them in order to set themselves up to the future. So not a great answer to your question, but it was definitely an interesting time. Obviously, I think they made the right decision because you got a guy like Justin Herbert now as a top 6, top 3 arm, top 6 quarterback in the league. And you can't complain with that, even with Philip maybe having a year or 2 left in the tank.
No, I think that's really great context because it's always good to move on 1 year early rather than 1 or 2 years late. And I thought that they handled it brilliantly. And the thing is that I've been calling it is the natural tank, where you go into a season thinking you're going to be fine. And if I remember that 5-win season, they lost like every game by 1 score, which is basically the opposite of what happened to the Vikings last year. And even if you adjust for like, oh, this team scored at the end to make it a 1-score game, the Vikings, if you switched everything around, even games that were not like that, they could have just as easily won 7 last year or won 6 last year. If that happens to them, it could be to their long-term benefit. And the Chargers are a team I'm going to point at and be like, look, the natural tank is okay. It's okay if everything goes wrong for your team. It'll be painful, but that might be what they need to get a future quarterback. But you're spot on in saying that if they win 11 games, what are you supposed to do are you supposed to pay Kirk? What if you're eliminated in the first round again, right? Kirk Cousins, here's a crazy stat for you, and I'll let you go because I go on for this all night. But like, Kirk Cousins has made in cash in his career $230 million and has 1 playoff win. I mean, you just can't keep doing that, right? So they're in a fascinating spot that I think would have been very similar to the Chargers going into Rivers' final season. And there's maybe even some comps there with those two as quarterbacks, though I'd say Rivers in his peak is like much better, but like late career 8-8 Rivers. So anyway, but we could just talk ball all night. I really appreciate all the context from you. Ryan Dyrud, LAFB, not hard to find on Twitter. And just LA Football Network, super cool. Like, I love that you did this to cover all of these teams. It's great stuff. And I mentioned I follow you on Twitter, so people should go do that as well. And follow your work out there. But thanks, man. I'm glad that I could come on your show. You come on mine, and we'll keep on doing this. So appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Really do appreciate it. And, I don't just say this, I say it off air too, but you are one of the best. I love what you do out there. And obviously Vikings fans should be very thankful, and congrats again on the book. And we'll definitely catch up more football all throughout the off season and through the season, though. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
You mean the book that pre-order is available now on Amazon? Football is I'm just going to be the worst with this.
I almost feel bad. Like,
guy.
I feel bad because I didn't even ask you. You may have had this like planned like release, and I just ruined it by just dropping it. Oh, congrats, by the way. And you're like, oh, great. Now I gotta plug it. So my bad.
So I already did the Twitter thing. I already did the self-promotion Twitter thing. We did a video where I like had a little banner show up near my head. Like, I mean, I'm just that guy. So if there's any fans of the show, The Critic, if you've ever seen that, there's a scene where he just says like, buy my book. But that's me now, essentially, for months. So everybody can get used to it. But anyway, Ryan, thanks again, man. And we will definitely talk again soon.
Yes. Thanks, brother.